The maintenance request goes in at 7:15 a.m., a dead radiator, apartment 4C, please advise. And 40 minutes later you get a reply from your property manager, a man named Corbin, informing you that maintenance requests are handled within 3 to 5 business days per the lease agreement, which is technically true and also a sentence you personally approved the wording of 11 months ago. Sitting in a lawyer's office, signing off on a lease template you would then go on to be governed by. Yourself as a tenant in your own building because you own it, and Corbin does not know that, and this is now, somehow, your actual life. You bought the building through an LLC 2 years ago, a genuinely boring, genuinely common structure, the kind almost every serious real estate investor uses, not for anything shady, just because holding property through a limited liability company separates your personal assets from any lawsuit a tenant might someday file over. Say, a radiator that took 6 days instead of 5. Your name appears nowhere on the lease, the mailbox, or Corbin's org chart. As far as Corbin knows, the building is owned by Fairview Holdings LLC, a faceless entity somewhere, the kind every property manager reports to and none of them ever meets. You didn't plan to live here. That part happened almost by accident, and it's the funniest decision you've ever made. You bought the 12-unit building as an investment, fully intending to keep your distance the way any sensible owner would. Then Unit 4C came up vacant right as your own lease across town was ending, and you did the math. Market rent, no broker fee since you technically own the broker fee, and genuinely, why would you pay someone else's rent when you could just pay your own, at a discount you set yourself? You filled out the rental application. You listed your actual job title as consultant, which is not technically a lie, and you submitted it to Corbin, who approved you within a day, remarking in the approval email that your credit score was refreshingly clean for this market. A compliment you have never been prouder of in your life. Here's the actual reason Corbin still has no idea, 6 months in, and it's a genuinely useful thing to understand about how commercial property management actually works. Corbin doesn't work for you directly. He works for a third-party property management company that Fairview Holdings LLC contracts with, and that company assigns building managers based on portfolio load, not personal relationships with owners. Most owners of small multifamily buildings, the 10 to 30 unit range, never meet their property manager face-to-face even once. Everything runs through quarterly financial reports and the occasional email about a major capital expense. This is, structurally, an extremely normal way for a landlord to be completely invisible to their own tenants, and you happen to be the single strangest edge case that structure was never designed to anticipate. The owner living inside it. The comedy really starts building around month 3, when Corbin begins treating you like a slightly problematic tenant. You submit a request about the shared laundry room's second dryer, which has been broken for what you, as the actual owner, know for a fact is now 19 days. Well past any reasonable service window, and Corbin's reply informs you that the property prioritizes maintenance requests based on severity, and that a broken dryer, while inconvenient, does not currently meet the threshold for expedited service. You are reading this email in your own apartment, in the building you own, being told by your own employee that your own broken dryer isn't a priority, and you have never in your life had to work this hard not to type something you'd immediately regret. You call the property management company's main line instead, mostly out of curiosity about how deep this goes, and speak to a woman named Winnie who cheerfully informs you that the owner has been notified of the capital expense. Meaning an email was sent, weeks ago, to an inbox you also own, that you have simply never checked. Because it's the LLC's business email and you check it maybe once a month like a normal absentee landlord would. You go check it. There it is. A request for dryer replacement approval, sitting unread, sent by Corbin to you, about a dryer in your own building that you, as a tenant, have also been complaining about. You have, somehow, been keeping yourself waiting. Here's where your friend Esperanza enters the story, and she becomes the only person who knows the whole truth for most of what follows. Esperanza is the one person you eventually tell, mostly because you need someone to confirm this situation is as insane as it feels, and she does not disappoint. She laughs so hard over dinner that she has to put her wine down, and for the rest of the meal she keeps circling back to it, unprompted, saying things like, "Wait, so you're mad at yourself," and "Does past you owe present you an apology?" And you realize that explaining your own life to another person is making you understand it less, not more. Esperanza, delighted by the whole situation, starts treating it as an ongoing bit. She texts you every time she thinks of a new angle. Does Corbin get a Christmas bonus from you? Do you tip yourself? What happens if you sue yourself for the dryer? Do you have to pay both lawyers? You start keeping a running note in your phone of her best ones, mostly because you suspect you'll want to remember this year as being funnier than it currently feels while you're actually living through it. Standing in a laundry room, holding wet clothes, staring at a piece of masking tape over the second dryer's start button that reads, in Corbin's handwriting, "Out of service, owner aware." The security deposit incident is the moment things almost get genuinely uncomfortable, and it's worth knowing the real rule behind it. 10 months in, you decide to move. Nothing dramatic, you just want a bigger unit in the same building, one that opened up on the third floor with better light. And you go through the actual, formal process of ending your 4C lease and signing a new one, because doing anything else would be a genuinely bad habit to start as a landlord who also happens to be a tenant. Corbin processes your move-out inspection personally, walks the unit with a clipboard, and dings you $180 from your security deposit for, where beyond normal use, on a section of hallway carpet. A charge you privately think is absurd, since you, the owner, set the standard for what counts as normal where in this building's maintenance policy, a policy you wrote. You almost fight it. Then you remember something genuinely useful, which is that most states legally require landlords to provide an itemized list of deductions within a specific window, typically 14 to 30 days depending on the state, or forfeit the right to withhold any of the deposit at all, and Corbin, to his credit, does this exactly on time, professionally, by the book, using a template that you, again, personally approved. You pay the $180. You transfer it from your personal account to your own LLC's account. You have never in your life felt so simultaneously robbed and enriched by the exact same transaction. Here's the part where the story almost stops being funny, and it's the actual emotional center of the whole thing. Around month 8, a tenant in 2B, an older woman named Ingrid, who you've said hello to in the hallway maybe a dozen times without ever mentioning who you actually are, falls behind on rent after a medical emergency, and Corbin, following the property management company's standard policy, begins the formal late fee and eventual eviction notice process, exactly as the lease permits, exactly as you yourself signed off on when you approved the management company's standard operating procedures. 2 years ago, back when late fees on a spreadsheet felt like an abstraction instead of an actual woman crying quietly in the elevator. You find out about it not from Corbin, but from Esperanza, who heard it from Ingrid directly at the mailboxes, and you spend that entire night doing something you genuinely didn't expect sudden secret wealth to ever require of you. Sitting with the specific, uncomfortable knowledge that the system you built, the reasonable, standard, industry normal system, was about to do exactly what it was designed to do to someone who didn't deserve it, and that you, personally, had the power to stop it. With one phone call nobody else in the building would ever be positioned to make. You call the management company directly the next morning, not as tenant 4C, but for the first time, as the actual owner of Fairview Holdings LLC, and you authorize a hardship deferment on Ingrid's account. A real thing. A real policy every serious management company has, that exists specifically for situations exactly like this one, and that almost never gets used because most owners are too far removed from their own buildings to ever hear about the moment it's needed. Winnie, processing the request, asks if you'd like this noted as a one-time exception or a standing policy for hardship cases going forward. You say standing policy. It's the easiest decision you've made all year, and also somehow the only one that's felt entirely uncomplicated. Corbin finds out 3 weeks later, and it happens exactly the way you'd never have planned it. A capital expense email, meant for the owner, gets accidentally CC'd to the building's general tenant announcement list instead of the owner's private inbox. A genuine, mundane, one-character email typo, the kind that ends careers in movies and just ends up faintly embarrassing in real life. And it lands in your tenant inbox with your actual name attached as Fairview Holdings LLC, owner, in the sender field. Because somewhere in the building's records, your legal name is, of course, on file. As the LLC's registered agent, a detail nobody had ever needed to cross-reference against the tenant roster until exactly this moment. Corbin calls you within the hour, and you can hear, even before he says anything, that he's already done the math. So, he says carefully, in the tone of a man deciding in real time how much of his last 8 months of emails he needs to mentally review. You're the owner. You confirm that you are. There's a long pause. Then he asks, with what you can only describe as genuine, wounded curiosity, did you actually think that dryer request wasn't a priority? And you tell him honestly, that no, you thought it was an outrage, and that you'd simply been too committed to the bit of being a normal tenant to blow your own cover over a dryer. Here's the thing almost nobody expects about how this actually resolves, and it's more interesting than a dramatic confrontation would have been. Corbin doesn't quit. He doesn't even seem particularly angry once the initial shock wears off. Mostly he's fascinated, in the specific way people get fascinated by a magic trick once they finally understand the mechanism, replaying 8 months of interactions to see which parts he'd have handled differently if he'd known. You end up having dinner with him and Esperanza a week later, mostly at Esperanza's insistence, because she has been waiting 8 months for an audience that actually appreciates the scale of the bit, and Corbin turns out to have his own running list, parallel to Esperanza's, of every slightly unhinged email he'd sent you without knowing, including one where he'd cautioned the tenant in 4C about excessive maintenance request frequency, a note he now reads aloud at the table with genuine, mortified delight. You keep the arrangement going, actually, with one adjustment. You tell Corbin the truth going forward, but you ask him to keep managing the building exactly the way he always has, by the same standard he applies to every other tenant, no favors, no shortcuts. Partly because you respect how seriously he took the job even when he thought no one important was watching, and partly because you've genuinely come to enjoy living inside a system that treats you exactly as fairly, and exactly as bureaucratically, as it treats everyone else. Ingrid's hardship policy stays in place. The second dryer gets replaced within the week, expedited. No threshold debate required this time. You still live in 4C's upgraded successor, 3 years later, still pay rent on time, still occasionally get a mildly passive-aggressive email about lease compliance from a man who now knows exactly who's on the other end of it and sends the email anyway, because that's simply how Corbin runs a building, and it turns out that's precisely the kind of person you wanted managing your investment the whole time. You just had to accidentally become his tenant to find out. That masking tape labeled dryer situation genuinely convinced me to get a proper label maker for the building instead of leaving handwritten notes everywhere. The exact one Corbin now uses is linked below. If you've ever ended up on the wrong side of your own decision without realizing it, tell me about it in the comments. I want to hear the most ridiculous one. Subscribe for the next story, dropping Thursday, and don't worry, nobody dies in this one. It's actually a nice change of pace.